we have a little bit of connection through my parents who have, I think my mom said, has known you for over 30 years. So a
Correct.
long history there. So it's
Mhm.
wonderful to have you here today.
Well, thank you for the invitation and thank you for being here. Have fond memories.
And I actually was wondering if we could start by reading a little bit from your book, America's Racial Karma. And I'd love to hear your response to this statement. So you write that healing and transforming the patterns of continuation in our internalized racialized karma depends on a fresher and deeper understanding of our humanity. To realize this understanding is beyond information gathering. So, what do you mean by going beyond just the information gathering to actually be able to heal the trauma of racial karma?
When you write a book, and I was in Oaxaca finishing it all up and everything, and now it's like, oh, I wrote that. Yeah, to use a phrase attributed to Einstein, that you can't solve a problem at the same level of energy that created it. And this is also beautifully referred to in my grandmother's hands, but what we have been conditioned to understand about one another as different peoples here and around the world is without context. And without context, traumatic experiences embedded in the body for generations or present moment experience looks like normality. If we don't understand our own biology and as it impacts psychology, as that impacts our social lives, we've divided the world up in all these pieces that are not pieces. They are constantly interacting. I wrote a phrase to myself of meditation yesterday that actually it's not our differences that cause us the greatest problem. It is, in fact, our similarities. And by similarities, I mean the human nervous system, which is our daily experience of life. And if we don't elevate our skills in learning how to recognize and tend to heal our nervous system patterns of reactivity, we can't break the pattern of racial karma because it's rooted in trauma. Trauma of the victims, trauma of the witnesses, the observers, and trauma of the perpetrators. And this all taking place here in the US on a ground of trauma of genocide. And once you start to understand that life is interconnected to life, not as a concept only, but as a lived experience in your body, you realize how deep the work is we need to do with one another and with ourselves in order to heal our woes.
When I interviewed Dr. Helen Neville from Psychology of Radical Healing Collective, she talked about how healing requires accessing the past, the present, and the future. And I was thinking about that and reading and learning more about you and your past and how much you've dedicated your life to healing, but also your own personal experience with trauma. And I'm wondering if you could share a bit about your experience of racial trauma with our listeners.
Oh, sure. I don't say that so easily, but I say it sincerely, my sure. Well, one story. I, I I'm afraid I have a lot of stories, but one that is still a meditation for me um, is our house was firebombed by a team of people dedicated to eliminating interracial couples in their part of the U.S. And we had the good fortune to be able to go to Plum Village and spend time with Thich Nhat Hanh after this occurred. So we had time to tend to our shock, our emotional pain. For a time, every smell of any smoke reactivated our body's sense of fear or anxiety or potential threat. And so spending time in the monastery was the most helpful thing in creating enough space inside of myself not to define myself by my trauma, to recognize my trauma, to honor it, to use a phrase from Thich Nhat Hanh, to call it by its true name, no escape, but to understand that that phenomenon, that experience does not define me. I'm defined by many things. And, and so without a spiritual practice, I think it is very difficult. And by spiritual, I don't mean abstract intellectual thought. I mean body centered healing and transformation and activating our deepest sense capacity of neuroplasticity to rewire ourselves in a good way. And, remembering that we're being rewired all the time by the society we live in, not just by our biology, not just by our psychology, but the interaction. You have to include out technology. No human being has ever found out so many things that are wrong so fast with the world. It's just this tsunami of, and that's why information is not enough. We have to move from information into knowledge and from knowledge into wisdom. But that wisdom has to be body centered wisdom, not simply the aspiration for wisdom.
When I had heard that you had gone to Plum Village after that horrific event, I just sort of had this vision of you with Thich Nhat Hanh, and he too had to leave his home
Mhm.
and experience so much trauma in his life. And I just wonder what some of the practices were, like the concrete,
Oh,
practices that
okay.
you were doing that, and I think our listeners both that are both therapists as well as
Okay.
people that have experienced trauma may want to learn.
We spent a lot of time in silence. And parts of the Buddhist tradition referred to as noble silence. And nobility here means the silence that heals, the silence that gives you time to come back to yourself, to reconstitute yourself without judgment, without blame. And so there's that piece of the practice was every day and every night, times in the day, but also from like 10 at night to 6 a.m. meditation, we were wrapped in a blanket of healing silence. The second thing is mindful walking, mindfulness of steps through the forest, and even mindful jogging, which Thich Nhat Hanh used to like to do from time to
I remember when I was in Plum Village seeing the monks in their full robes jogging, and I was like, "How is this mindfulness?"
time.
Yes.
And the secret in terms of movement of the body in mindfulness is not how fast we move or how slow we move. It is how conscious are we of our embodied movement. So once you learn how to move slowly and become conscious, just like when you learn to play the piano or learn to play golf, you start off doing things slow so that you can start to build the patterns in your body and in your mind of repetition. And or in jazz and playing the piano, you have to learn to scale, before you can become Thelonious Monk. And so it's a journey of mastery. And for me, it was great fortune to be in Plum Village with the monks and nuns and Thich Nhat Hanh. The one thing he did say to us after asking how we were, how was our dog, and how sorry he was that this occurred, after a couple of days, we sat again together for a long time, first always in silence. And he said, that was just horrible, but don't put your energy there. You have bigger work to do. And I meditated on that for a while, and I realized part of the impact of an attack like that is to, at a spiritual level, to crush your heart, to wrap you in trauma so that you live the rest of your life in reactivity to hatred, which you then embody inadvertently, um, just like you can embody the good. So the whole slowing down part of the practice overall helped us heal in the midst of our tears and our sorrow and our anger, all of which are legitimate human experiences. The question always is how to practice with these experiences so they, while they may injure us, they do not damage us.